Welcome to Peaceful Power Project. Peaceful Power Project is a podcast dedicated to mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being. I am so excited. I've actually had to tell myself, I had to take some deep breaths beforehand. I'm so excited to meet number one. This is like a first time meeting. I'll share that I get a little flustered, meeting someone for the first time, especially someone that it's such a strange world we live in. I've admired and respected and been inspired by this individual from afar, like virtually. It's so strange and incredible that we can do that these days, and that Lola Remy, our guest today, accepted my invitation to be on this podcast. I am feeling so grateful to meet you. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to learn more about your story, yourself. So just first, thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be able to do it, able to join you.
Yeah, I'm so yeah. I randomly popped in and I'm like, can you be my guest? So the intention always for me having a platform of a podcast is to let a story that inspires you reach others. And I don't have a formal bio, though I'm super curious of what you do if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll do the air quotes, what you do in your life and everything. But to me, like I already stated, you have been for the past couple of years a huge inspiration. And if you don't mind, can I share a couple of, you posted it on Instagram, so I hope that I can share it. But some of the, okay, thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Some of the things that have stuck out to me, though this is not your bio that you designated as an introduction, but let me find the first one. Oh, this is so good. I may drop it, but I'll pick it back up. And this was, I don't know if you remember every single thing you wrote on Instagram, but like a deadlift workout in your recovery journey. And I am going to read, I thought this was really cool, because I always want to make sure to be respectful of the right terms, but I did see the hashtags of stroke recovery, life after stroke, stroke survivor, strong after stroke. And this was beautiful. A little while ago, my husband asked me what I want to tell him to tell people when they ask how I'm doing. I didn't have much of an answer because I'm still working on what to say when people ask me the same. We decided to just say, getting better each day. Am I recovered? No. Am I better than I was? Yes. Am I working towards even better? Absolutely. I actually screenshot many of these, but I think I'll leave it there because that's it. That's the power and the impact that I see. I'll drop it and I'll get it back. I'll just pick it back up, right? And then the am I recovered? Am I working towards it? And am I getting better every day? And that's what kind of more of those have impacted me very personally. So with that, yeah, let's start with who are you? What do you do?
I'm Lola Remy. I live in the Boston area. I'm originally from Haiti, Port-au-Prince area, outside of Port-au-Prince, but I've lived in Boston most of my life, and that's where I make my home now. In the daytime, I used to be an attorney, and I am still, but I don't practice as much. I direct a pro bono program for domestic violence survivors. So I train and mentor newer people, newer attorneys to take the cases. So that's what I get paid to do most of the time. Peripherally, because I feel like the work just doesn't end. I do, I do a lot of volunteer work as well, and so I volunteer in a lot of spaces with women and trauma survivors and folks who are recovering from different kinds of challenges in life, including homelessness or immigration challenges or food insecurity and things like that. So a lot of my actual work touches those topics, but I also spend a lot of time outside of work being on boards and working with folks on making our community better just generally.
Amazing. And how, wow. Um, I, what hit me the most and the story I will invite you to share about, is that the, the people that you work with and support and, help navigate through these certain, whether it's trauma, food insecurity, it just, I found a great parallel to your story and your experience with something being mental, emotional, and spiritual, and then having that physical recovery journey as well. Do you find there's a parallel? And actually, let me start with just asking about the story of your stroke and how it's impacted your life presently. And am I off to see like a connection between your work that you did before and you focused in that area before, and has your experience impacted your work now?
Yeah, absolutely. So about my stroke, I'm 43 now. As of last Monday, I just had a birthday. Yay,
Happy
birthday month.
birthday.
Thank you. So I had my stroke when I was 40 years old, and it happened. I don't know where the peak of the pandemic was. It was a moving target in our area. So definitely it was a COVID spike. And in Massachusetts, we had a lot of restrictions around everything. And I was sitting at home in December. And so that's the important part of that is a lot of people had gone home or been with family over the Thanksgiving break. And so, like, we had a huge spike. And so, when I woke up feeling not so great, a month from today, actually, December 6th, I just thought, there's no way I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm fine. There's nothing going on here because hospitals were where people were getting COVID. So, I thought I'd wait and see. So, I was minding my business, getting some Christmas shopping done online for like my little nieces and nephews. And my arm started to get tingly. And I'll be very candid. It was maybe noon, but I'd already been drinking because I was making hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps, and so the schnapps was old. Also, I don't drink so much. So I was like, wow, I'm really impacted by this alcohol. Like, I feel so tingly, So I thought the alcohol was kind of doing weird things to me. So at about 2 o'clock, I thought, wow, I'm not that much of a lightweight. I just had one chocolate with a little alcohol, and I'm starting to feel even more drunk than I was at noon. But still, I thought, let me not make a fuss because bigger things are happening out there. People are actually sick. So I just kept sitting around. At around 4 o'clock, I thought, well, I'm definitely not drunk, but I can't close my hand and I can't hold my phone anymore that I was using to order the Christmas presents. I probably should do something. My husband had been out of the house. He'd been outdoors doing some climbing trip. And so I said, hey, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm feeling a little wonky. And he says, well, call the doctor and see what they say. So I called the urgent care, and the person on the phone said, please come in. We don't know what to do. We can't diagnose you over the phone. Um, and I thought, no, thank you. Absolutely not. So at this point, it's 4 o'clock. I know. At this point, it's 4 o'clock. And I'm like, no, thank you. It becomes 6 o'clock, and I'm like, oh gosh, something needs to give. So I called them back and they said, please come in. We've got a different COVID area. You won't be sick for coming, but we can't tell you anything over the phone that we haven't told you the first time you called. So I called my husband. I said, hey, they said I should come in. Can you take me? And he said he was, I don't know if you're familiar with the area, but he was in Rhode Island, which is about a 2 hour drive from where we were staying. But it was our first snow of the season. And he says it's really coming down south, and I don't think I'll be home anytime soon. So you should take an Uber to the hospital. So I get myself dressed. I get in the Uber and we're chatting and we're friendly and everything. And I walk into the hospital. I'm like, hi, everyone. I'm like blowing kisses. I'm making friends with all the people, shaking hands with the front desk staff. I mean, not really because we're all masked and gloves or whatever. Um, so I wait in the waiting room. And then somebody comes in describing COVID symptoms and they sat next to me. And I was like, I'm leaving. They sent a nurse out to basically like sedate me. The nurse was like, please don't go. We're going to take great care of you. I think it's really important that you stay. I said, I've been here 30 minutes and now people are here describing COVID symptoms. And I feel like I just really want to leave. And they said, well, we'll just take you out back, not out back, but into the imaging room and do some tests. And then you can leave if you really want to. So I go to do the imaging, but it's a small hospital and they don't have a neuro person on site. So they have to send the photos to the hospital, not far, but not on site, for somebody to review it. And the person was not available at the moment. So I'm waiting an hour in the waiting room and really getting anxious. Like, I just want to go home. And they give me like medication because at this point I'm still feeling kind of woozy. And they're like, do you have a history of migraines? Do you have trouble breathing typically? Are you always this amped up? I'm like, no, not really. So they're like trying to keep me calm. And at this point, I'm feeling like, so at this point, it's almost midnight. And I'm thinking, I'm gonna have to stay in the hospital. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm so healthy. I'm absolutely fit. I eat well. I'm only 40. They're gonna keep me overnight and I'm gonna get a $5,000 hospital bill. I really want to go home. Please let me go home. Meanwhile, I teach yoga as well. So I was supposed to teach a yoga class on Sunday morning, which I'd been doing for years and years. And because the gym was closed, it was going to be a virtual class. So I thought, let me message people from the class that I won't probably make it because at this point it's midnight. And I'm thinking, even if I leave by 4 a.m., my class is at 9, I won't be up to it. So when I opened my phone, I think the light triggered something and I started to have a seizure. It was the scariest thing I'd ever lived through. I'd never had a seizure before, but I was aware of them, and I thought, this is not right. So I'm like trying to send the message and I'm doing this thing. And a nurse runs into the room, had missed the entire thing, and she didn't know what was wrong with me. And I said, something happened. And she said, I didn't see anything on your monitor. You're probably fine. Just try to relax. Maybe put the phone down. I thought, well, I can't put the phone down. I gotta let people know that I'm not gonna be in class tomorrow. So she leaves. I go to send another message and I have another seizure. But this time she caught it and she called a code blue and everybody came running in. And that was basically the last thing I remembered. So at this point, it's probably the morning of December 7th. Um, and the next date I was aware of was December 15th. So I'd been in the ICU, had multiple surgeries before I woke up next. And when I woke up, I was in ICU with my husband, and we had no visitation policy. So it was one person per day who was allowed to come to the hospital. I don't know. I don't want to say that. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but the staff was so kind with me. They let my family come in one at a time, but multiple people were allowed to come per day. So no two people could come, but my brother, my sister, my cousins took turns visiting. And so it was I feel like it was a very generous thing they were allowing me to do. But otherwise it was just me in the hospital. So I ended up being in the hospital total until the end of January the following year. And finally it was time to leave. But at that point I was so sick still and I had not been in the world since my stroke. I was terrified about what it was going to be. I really didn't want to go home. I wanted to go home, but I didn't want to go home. You know what I mean? Like I was very much using a wheelchair and I was getting help getting in and out of bed. And I had a bed with um, bars so I wouldn't roll off. At that point, I was completely paralyzed on one side. I still had a feeding tube. I was barely able to speak again. And the thought of being home was just terrifying. But my care providers were so amazing, and I'm so grateful to them and for them. They, to the extent they could, I mean, I was a nervous wreck. but they were really encouraging and really supportive of me going home. And I don't know if they were lying, but I think that it turned out to be right that I was going to do so much better at home than I was doing in the hospital. They promised that being in my safe, comfortable space with people who love me, I would see changes. And I thought, there's no way you're right. I'm going to be like this forever. And we got a wheelchair for the house and a ramp for the house. And I asked my physical therapist there how long should I would need the wheelchair, and she said I would say 7 days. I was like, lady, have you have you seen me? I don't even stand up. What do you mean 7 days? And she said, no, you're strong. You're because before the stroke, I was a fitness instructor. I taught multiple classes a week. I'd lost a lot of muscle mass and a lot of endurance and a lot of stamina since the stroke, but she didn't think I was going to have too hard a time. So when she said 7 days, I thought, unbelievable. But then once I got home, so the Boston area, everything here is pretty old. I mean, some things are new, but everything is really old. So I live in a pretty old house, and the doors are very narrow and they are not accessible. They are not built for folks with disabilities. And after, I would say after 3 days of trying to get to the bathroom in the wheelchair and trying to get into the bedroom with the wheelchair and getting in and out of the house, nearly dying on the ramp that we'd had installed, I was like, we need a different plan. I got to get walking. So it was a necessity more than an actual internal motivator. And I always wondered what things would have been like if I had the means to like move somewhere else. Because I think what could happen is that folks have a stroke and then adapt everything to fit their needs, which is amazing. And for people who can do that, that's terrific. But that was not in our budget, in our lifestyle. We had no preparation for that kind of thing. And so getting out of this house and going to a new apartment with a walk-in shower or something that had an elevator was just not something that we could do. So we just had to make do with what we could. And that really kind of bolstered me into really making efforts to get up the stairs. I mean, I'm saying stairs. We have 5 steps up onto the porch, but you know, it's a lot. If you're in a wheelchair, one step is a lot. So
Absolutely. And hearing that like having obstacles and challenges is what was like the impetus or catalyst for like, yeah, things have to change, but that change isn't going to come from like a lot, you know, all of these amenities. The change is going to come from you. To rewind a little bit, just because that was quite an education for me. And again, not as a medical professional, I'm just asking like personally, the symptoms you described leading up to them concluding that in fact this was a stroke, I had no idea it could be so prolonged or so like unique and varied. And was that anything that came into your mind with the hands not opening or the no, yeah. If you're
not
not
at
on
all.
YouTube,
Not at
there's
all.
a shaking
Not
head.
at all.
So what was your kind of like even post, I would say just like education on like stroke symptoms or how to even I heard you say I'm not going to a hospital right now. No way.
Yeah.
Where someone would seek like medical attention sooner rather than just kind of figuring it out.
I think one thing that's changed for me since the stroke is when in doubt, seek medical advice because I would have had no way to know. And I meet people with different stroke symptom manifestations, and I don't hear people with the same symptoms that I had. Apparently, it seems I'd been having tiny seizures all day because I had to bleed. And so the opening and closing my hands, I still was not prepared to go to the hospital. I So when I looked up why can't I hold my phone my phone, I Googled it.
Of course.
And Google said carpal tunnel, stroke. I was
Right.
like, Google, I think you're off on this one. Because if I'd had carpal tunnel, I think I would have known. But certainly if I had a stroke, I would have known. Google, I would have known. And like I am not a candidate for stroke. I did not have high blood pressure. I was not overweight. I don't have a history of blood disorders or anything like that. So nothing would have prepared me to acknowledge that that was a stroke that I was having. And it took all those hours. And the moment I knew I had to go be seen was because I'm a fitness nut. And I had already taken 2 rest days. And so I thought, well, on Sunday, so at that point, we were teaching yoga in the studio, but everybody else was at home. So like I was gonna go into the studio. And I thought, well, if I'm gonna be there, I would like to work out. And I went to my workout room at home to pick up my kettlebell, and I could not get my hand to close around the kettlebell. And I thought, uh-oh, well, texting is one thing, but if I can't snuggle with my with my kettlebell for 3 days in a row, what's gonna happen? So I thought there's no way I'm gonna make it 3 days rest, 3 days without a workout. So I'd better go see somebody. So that was really
And
the
that's like the beauty to me of having like a consistent movement practice. Mine's transitioned through the years. For like 15 years, it was all yoga all the time. Then I got into kettlebell and strength training for a good 2 straight years. Then I've been a bit of a run nut. But when you do something consistently, it's such a great, like, no run's a bad run, because if something feels horrible, it's literally like 2 days later, my cycle starts, or 2 days later, I come down with like a terrible flu. It's such great information when you have that like consistent movement practice of any type. I like to hear that part of your story, that there was this voice that something was
yeah.
off there.
And there is something to knowing who you are at baseline, which over the years I've become pretty familiar with. I mean, we're all growing and all changing, right? So it could be whatever it is on any day. But I knew that 3 days I should be feeling my strongest because I rested, because I'm not an avid drinker. I thought the alcohol would have some sort of impact, but I was pretty sure that did not feel the way I should be responding to like a gigantic hot chocolate cup with maybe 2 ounces of peppermint schnapps, which is like what we drink when we're like 15 years old. You know what I mean? Like our first experimental. Well, I'll speak for myself. The schnapps things are not exactly what's tanking people. So like something is just not aligned here. There's a different story. And then Google tried to tell me, but I was like, no, you're wrong.
So I would love to know, because there's a big shift, and I'm sure it took more time than just like a flip of a switch, but there's a shift from like being sent home with a lot of like fears and anxieties and not even knowing your own capabilities or healing journey, and actually having someone say 7 days and you're like, yeah, you have, do you see, like what you said, do you see me? Going from that to kind of the yeah, I dropped it, but I'm going to pick it up. Like going from that to like all the progress and success, not only that I have seen like physically and that you've experienced physically, but I'm more the success like mindset wise. Like, where was that shift to, yeah, I'm going to be, I'll just deadlifting again, or like you did a clean to a press, or like that I'm going to be doing any of this again, much less walking again. How did that mindset shift happen from kind of coming out of that? Actually, maybe even pause. How is it to come out of this space of, I don't recall if it was like 7 days, but the amount of days since you remembered entering the hospital?
How was it waking up, being in the hospital after?
Yeah.
Oof.
And then
Oh,
then the other question, I know I was like throwing so many questions at you, but how is that mind space? And then I guess to just slowly transition into like, yeah, I can and I do mind space.
yeah. So the waking up part, I was super drugged, so it's hard to really say, but I was so sick. There was no mind space. And I still get to talk with my husband who visited me every single day. Um, about what things happened, and I have no recollection of them. I was in so much pain. I was completely numbed because that's how I had to be. And I was not eating, I was not feeding myself, I was not bathing. So being awake is a generous way to say what happened. I became aware and I could kind of chat is also a strong word because I was not verbal. I could communicate with the nurses just like miming and things to request music. And I had my iPad. My husband brought me on my iPad so that we could play music that I liked. Um, so that was basically the extent of it. I did feel tremendous love from people. People were so generous with their time and their energies. People would send me voice memos. One of my meditation teachers sent me maybe like 3 hours of guided meditation where it was just her. I'm gonna cry. Where it
Me
was just her, like oh my god, I love you. Um, her just reading meditations, like ones I'd loved and ones I never heard before, and the nurses were so kind to play them for me whenever I requested them. So that happened. I wasn't able to FaceTime or call people, but people were sending me voicemails. My sister-in-law recorded a whole spin class. Anyway, it was so great. And she's like, we're writing for you today. We're just thinking of you. And I thought, I'll never do this again. Like, I will never be on a bike again because at this point, I can't feel my toes. I can't feel anything like on my left side. And she's like, we're just holding your spot. We got you, girl. Let's go. And I was like, oh my God, these total strangers are sending me all this love. So I was very, very privileged and fortunate to have so much love and so much support at that very dark time. And I can't say it was a good time, but I think people who go through things like this sometimes say we wish that things were more this loving and more community oriented all the time. And we know why it can be, but I was just so glad I got to experience that with all these people while I was in this difficult time. So that's what being in the hospital was like. Um, Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm going to. So I'm right there with you. And just to hear like that you weren't even in a mind space, but you were able to feel and receive the love that was being directed towards you, poured over you. That's when I say like, oh, spiritual, emotional, physical, mental. Like we always think it's like physical first, then mental, and then emotional, and then spiritual. But this love is from spirit. It's from like soul, right? And that's what you felt first before any connection to physical strength. That's what I got out of what you shared. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And that trend that carried me through the first, I would say, year. So before the stroke, I have a pretty strong spiritual practice where like I just believe that things either will work out or they won't. I can do what I can do, and I can't do what I can't do, and that things are good, people are good, and people are here to support me in being good and being well. And I got so incredibly lucky that I had. So here are the things that I couldn't control. So because I live in Boston, I do have access to impeccable healthcare, which doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. But when people ask me how come I recovered so well so quickly, I do say something that has nothing to do with me. My family moved here from Haiti when I was 9, and we just live here. That's not something I've done to earn. That is just a privilege that I have. So I did get to go to the best hospitals for neuro care in the country and among the best in the world. And for a person who works at a nonprofit with just like rinky dinky insurance, they just happen to offer like the best insurance a person could have. And I totally just lucked into that. So I did have access to care that was incredible and professionals who are highly competent in their field and who are teachers and who are multiple time over surgeons and PhDs. And I don't mean to like make it seem like the titles are what the things are, but I went to the hospital that's basically affiliated with Harvard Medical School. And what are you gonna do? I mean, we can poo-poo the ivory tower all we want, but like if I'm gonna have brain surgery, I'm happy to have a neurosurgeon who's teaching neurosurgeons at Harvard Medical School do mine. So I really looked into that. And I think somehow feeling like I had that safety net and coming from a place where I generally just trust. I don't know why. I probably shouldn't. But I generally just feel like it'll be fine. Like I'm not a person who clutches their pearls or keeps their wallet close or, things like that, or doesn't walk down the street at night. I just feel like the world is a good place. The universe is a safe place. I am not deserving of harm and harmful things won't happen to me. And getting to have that support, I just kind of felt like, well, of course, it's what I deserve. We all deserve that. Of course, I'm getting the best care possible. Of course, these people are kind to me. Of course, my professionals are actually exquisite. Of course, my friends love me because why wouldn't they? Like, why wouldn't I deserve that? It's so, I hate saying it, but you know
No,
what I'm
I
saying?
love
I'm
it.
glad
This
that
is
you're nodding
fun,
because
inspiring. This is part of what I get pumped about, and why I wanted to meet you.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course I'm getting good things because good things should come to me. And so a big thing that was helpful for me is that people were very affirming. And I tell people this all the time who are new in their stroke recovery. If you're having trouble finding faith in yourself, let others hold the faith for you. Because so when I was in the hospital, I was very cranky. One of the first doctors I met there said, "So you used to be a lawyer." Nice. I was really like, "What do you mean used to be?" I was like, "Am I disbarred? Do you know something I don't know?" And like I think she was a student, like an attendee. I don't know what they're called, but that person was like, "Yeah, no, she's still a lawyer." Like, I don't know. We don't know what's gonna happen. I'm still a month in. I may have terrible damage that I can't practice law anymore, but don't put that on me, sister. Keep that to yourself. That was the only incident that I felt like somebody was writing a diagnosis for me as if like they knew what was going to happen. But everyone else was like, "Girl, you're going to be back teaching yoga. I'm coming to your class. I'm going to take your spin class." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I'll just believe them." So I just let them hold that for me and hold that with me. And also because I'm Haitian and we believe in dreams. I'm speaking for all Haitians, which I know I can't do, but like people will call and they'll say, "I had a dream about you." And like, that's real. My cousins, my brother, my aunties would call and they'd say, "I had a dream that you were walking down the street." I was like, "Thanks, guys. Thank you. I really appreciate that," because I could not see a world where I was walking down the street. But knowing that people saw that for me really made all the difference in what I could hold for myself. So even for the strangers in the hospital, the professionals who really didn't know me except what they saw in my chart, because they know everything about your whole your whole life. When they said those things, I chose to believe them. And so when the person who told me I was going to be out of the wheelchair in 7 days said that, I chose to believe her because why wouldn't I? And she was totally right. And it's not like I was running down the street in 7 days out of a wheelchair, but certainly walking around the house. As soon as she spoke it, it became not a reality, but it became possible.
Possibility. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the transition out of the hospital. It was like a lot of other people holding for me and speaking into possibility, things that didn't feel possible to me at the time. And I think it's still that way. And the more it's like training wheels, right? The more you do it, the more it's true. So I still live my life that way. Short story, I can go on and on. But I finally had to go clean out the locker of where I used to teach because first of all, everything was happening and then we got a notice the gym was closed effective immediately. And so all of our stuff was just there. And so that was about 9 months. And then I had the stroke. And then so I was up for another long time. And eventually I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't find I can't find this one thing." I could, random things I didn't have. And I thought, first of all, I should probably get those things, but also somebody might need that locker. So the day I went to clean out my locker, the person at the desk who I'd known for years because she'd been promoted through the gym from when I had like just started teaching. So I must have known her 10 years, roundabout. So when I walked in there, she gave me this huge hug, and I explained to her, I mean, she'd already known everything because we're friends, and she'd been like loving all over me and like sending me messages and whatever. And so I surprised her to go clean out the locker with my husband. And she was like, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" I said, "Well, we're in the area. I wasn't really planning on it. And so I just feel like I should get this stuff out so somebody else can have the locker." And she said, "That's weird because I think you're going to be back and you're going to need the locker." And I was like, "Yeah, right. Yeah, right. No, no, let somebody else use it because what's the point? I don't need to like sit on it." And that was maybe April. Anyway, so she said what she said. And I thought, lady, have you seen me? I'm like hobbling up the stairs. Was I still using a cane at that point? I don't know. I may have been over the cane, but I was still very much having a hard time even just standing. And I'm like low energy and I'm tired very easily. And I can't stand too long because all of my weight is on my strong side and my left side is just along for the ride. So, anyway, some months later, she's like, "I'm putting you back on the schedule. When do you want to jump on?" And I said, "Too much, too fast." She said, "But what if you cover for Sarah, my friend Sarah, who is also a yoga instructor?" She said, "What if you cover for Sarah? She's going away, blah, blah time." And I was like, I'm not sure. Um, Look around. If no one else can do it, you let me know. She's like, "Really consider it." And I said, okay. So I'm like just trying to get her off the phone. Yeah. So she calls me back maybe 2 weeks later. She says, "Nobody's able to cover Sarah because it's a Saturday morning class over summer. So can I do it a couple of times?" And I said, "Fine." So I went and it was fine. I didn't need a locker, but I taught the class and it was okay. And I felt like I needed to explain to people why I was moving differently at first, but people were totally loving and unfazed. They were just there to do their yoga, and it was not a conversation really. Except a few people who did share with me that they'd also had difficult life challenges or their parents had had a stroke and they're so glad that I'm here, things like that. And of course, we like cried together, cried together. Um, so that happened. So I covered for Sarah a couple of times because my friend had asked me. Then I'm minding my business. Sarah calls and says, "Hey, I hear the summer went well. Thanks for covering the couple of classes. Can you cover for me every Tuesday in September and October?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." Because at that
That's
point, I'm feeling
covering.
like, huh?
She just put you on the schedule, right? That's not
Yeah,
covering. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Sure. And I'm thinking, I can always bail. I can always make up a story why I can't because September's far away. And then I got off the phone and I realized September, we're like end of August, and September's like in 4 days. And so there was no chance to really negotiate or backpedal because I would never like leave somebody in the lurch like that. Like once I just said yes, at least I'm going to show up and do my best. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I didn't feel comfortable saying, "Oh, I know I just said yes, but like I can't do it." So it kind of launched me into it. Long story long, that's how I got back into teaching yoga. And then she also mentioned she wanted me to come back and teach spin. And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to need a locker." And she said, "Bring your stuff." And so I brought all my stuff back to the gym like 6 months after I'd emptied it out. And I'm now back to teaching spin and teaching yoga. So
That was
that's
like a whole lesson in law of attraction right there. But I do love that you began what I would tell someone who's in the early stages of recovery from stroke is allow others to hold that vision for you. But that vision, like your whole story was like a law of attraction, this total and supported by others. So I follow a lot of the support you get from your trainer.
Mhm.
And that was when you were saying like have others like hold that vision. There was one of the screenshots I took that was like have a trainer who will always choose a heavier weight than you think you're capable of. I didn't say the quote exactly. Not going to go on my phone, but so both your physical healing and then you shared about not being verbal, whereas like at this moment, you're like one of the most eloquent humans I've ever had a conversation with. So, what was that healing like as well? I'm not entirely familiar, and I do know that every case is unique. So, the question is just like your unique experience, both with your physical and getting the side to strengthen or cooperate or receive information. And then also with the verbal, I'd love to learn more about your recovery journey in that aspect.
Yeah, so I'm not a professional either, but from what I can tell, the verbal recovery is also tied to the cognitive recovery. The folks who do that work are the same. So I had a speech language pathologist, and I've learned so much about what they do. And my sister-in-law is actually one, and I had no idea. I thought she just worked with babies who like had trouble, had lisps, and she does, but she really works with like children who need a little more support around their cognition and their communication and just wholeness. Anyway, that's not the point. So I had a person initially. One of the things that they do as well as speech and cognition is assess ability to swallow and ability to like breathe and things like that. So in the moments when I was not verbal, I was just having a hard time breathing and swallowing. And so that's why I ended up having to have a feeding tube. It wasn't safe to have food going down my throat. So the person who assesses people or assess me for that would do little tests about how I was breathing and like have me do some breathing exercises. And that was incredibly difficult because I have a pretty robust breathing practice. And I'm like, I could teach a person to breathe, but I can't breathe right now. I can't breathe right now. So that was distressing for all the reasons that you might imagine. But she was really great. Like there were a lot of tears in the hospital is the thing everybody should know. Because waking up being a totally different person or in a different space than you went to sleep is distressing, period, full stop. So the grief keeps coming and coming and coming. Anyway, so that person had to assess me for ability to swallow, breathe, teach me breathing exercises. And eventually, I think about a month in, I got to do a swallow test. And I was cleared for different levels of food. First, foods that were mostly liquid, and then eventually chewing with somebody watching me chew and coming over. Just if I so much as went, the person would like be be on me. So the person who is assessing that process is also assessing neurocognition. And so we played a lot of games, and some of the things that we did at first was just me thinking of words, which is incredibly difficult when you've had a recent brain injury. And we would do things like name all the fruit I could think of. And so I'm trying to think of fruit and I'm trying to speak fruit. And I'm trying to breathe as I think of fruit and speak fruit. It's the hardest thing I'd had to do up until then. So we did a lot of that. And then being able to speak sitting up became another challenge. Um, my voice was incredibly weak. I actually have some video from the hospital when I first started speaking because it was still around Christmas. Speaking is a strong word. Sorry to articulate things. Um, so I would send little voice messages to my nieces and nephews because they were sending them back and just being the cutest ever. So I like would try to respond, and it's so funny that I have them now, and I'm like barely audible, no affect. It's just like things like that. So we worked a lot on that, and then about 2 months in, I got a lot better. And then people started being able to call me. So I spoke with somebody who had not heard me, had not realized I was not verbal. And so everybody who was very close to me was so glad that I was finally speaking. And when I spoke with this friend, she said, I barely recognize you because you're missing that spark. Like you don't sound like yourself. And I thought, interesting. And I think everybody who was close was just so relieved that I was speaking and breathing. They didn't think about the other stuff. And so having that conversation with that friend, I mentioned it to my speech language pathologist, who by this point is a different person because I'd moved hospitals. Um, So my new speech therapist was on it. She had all the exercises, she had activities, she had a list of things. So one of the activities we ended up having to that she assigned me to do was saying things like that could mean different things based on where you put the emphasis. Like I would like a cup of coffee, or I would like a cup of coffee, or I would like a cup of coffee, things like that. And so like practicing those and recording myself, and then I would send them to her and she would, things like that. So that was the transition out of nonverbal to chatterbox. Chatterbox. And it all went along with more cognitive and cognition things. Um, Puzzles every day. And I still do puzzles every day because, it's a lifelong journey. And I remember having a total fit in the hospital because I had always been a person who loves puzzles, different kinds, but the puzzles I was being asked to do felt like they were tricks, or that I was trying to be, they were trying to like tangle me up so I would stay in the hospital forever. I just got this wave of like weird paranoia and anger and frustration at my brain, at my body, at her for the difficult time that I was having. And so I just started sobbing and convulsing. And she's like, hey, remember we can breathe? Like, oh, we can. She's like, we can take a break. We can. Like I had lost the ability to like regulate time and feeling and my needs. And she was just so great. So we took a break. She was like, we can play two songs. You can pick. And so I picked two songs and we just played them loud on her phone. And then I was ready to get back to the puzzles. So that was just a lot of coaxing, a lot of help and support in getting back my cognition and getting my speech. I did end up having to do a what do they call it? Like a psych eval at some point because it's just what they need to do to make sure that you're okay to be out in the world, especially to practice law. Well, also my malpractice insurance wanted to make sure I wasn't gonna have a miss have a problem with a client. So I did have to talk with somebody to make sure I was clear and okay to like communicate and manage my feelings and manage my time, manage my executive functions and things like that. So that was
I
part of it.
think I think that's where my mind made the leap when you were first sharing what kind of law and what population you work with when you mentioned trauma, because my mind went to like this experience of the stroke and recovery being something that they gave you an evaluation just to make sure that you didn't have the PTSD of that experience. It's not always in a certain like scope. Do you associate it as something that was a traumatic experience for you?
I do. I do. And part of what's nice about the eval is they talk to you about your life before the stroke, and so they mark other traumatic experiences because try to act surprised when I tell you at age 40 this was not the first difficult thing that's happened to me. So like separating what those things were from what this is. So it was like a 6 hour thing. I don't even, something like that, maybe 3 hours, but it was a lot of like talking. And I did end up going to a pretty, let's see, so I go to therapy, but after the stroke, I was going to therapy every week. Now it's different, but there was some like work around how do we get back into the world in a new body, in a new space, in a different ways. So yeah, I definitely consider it a traumatic experience. And one interesting thing about it is because I'd had other things happen before, and I'd been working with populations around trauma for years at this point. Um, I had some of the principles kind of like up here, but like when something huge happens, all of a sudden it makes it here, like it makes it happening to you and not just like around you. And I can't say I'm glad that I had the stroke. I would never say that, or that some people should, but I've learned a lot about really being in my own body and empathy for others who are in different space and different times. And I mean, intellectually and in practice, I kind of had been, but it's different. It's different being able to say, oh, I hear that it might be difficult to like be in your body because of an assault versus being like, oh, yes, it's difficult to be in my body because I've had this difficult thing happen where like things don't move the way I want them to move and things don't respond as quickly as I want them to. So sometimes I understand what you're saying when you're saying it's distressing to be in your body because it's distressing to be in my body. And even if the situations that put us in that distress are different, the feelings are pretty similar.
I appreciate you revisiting that. And that will be a great transition to that physical recovery journey. I wanted to read one. It's so beautiful. Slowly, this is from one of your posts. I am getting there, and you're in tabletop pose. Some things take muscling through, and some take time and finesse. I've been working on getting into this tabletop position for months. Most of the work has been training my brain not to freak out when my knee and ankle are in certain positions. When my ankle bends, an alarm goes off and I panic that my foot twists itself into a pretzel. Months of self-soothing and patience and gradually adding seconds to the time I allow myself to stay in it are paying off. And that one, just the idea that both your physical body is assuming a shape, right? The asana or the posture, but your mind is wrapping itself around like being safe in this shape again. And I didn't know how much that yoga teaching, like what your background was with that. So it means even more because when I first read that, I was like, I'm again very impacted by the mind having to wrap around being in the shape in a body, you said, and not a different body or a different self, but a self in this experience. I'm just taking what you said like a few moments ago. And so is fit to function, is that a coach? What is that?
Fit to Function is a program started by my coach, Jenna Muir Rosenthal. She's got a long name, Jenna. So she works with folks with lots of different neuro adjacent troubles or disorders, including stroke, Parkinson's, MS, things like that. So she does all of the training one-on-one, and her goals include supporting folks who have never been in the gym before to feel comfortable going to the gym, and folks who had a very strong physical practice before going back in their new bodies. So all the work that she does is based on the individual and where the individual wants to go. It's a lot of work on function, even though a lot of the basis for her work is CrossFit. And I don't want to misrepresent her work. And I think you should invite her at some point if you'd like to have. But I think one of her primary goals is helping folks understand that what we see on TV in competitive CrossFit is just what we see on TV. It is not representative of everything that CrossFit is about. And so CrossFit at its heart is really about function and strength through functional training. And so one of the first things we did in our sessions, so she does a 1 hour free trial with each person who's interested. When I went to my trial, one of the first things we did was getting off the floor. And I met her a year and a half after my stroke, and I had never been on the floor before. And like how that would happen was completely mysterious to me because when you've had a stroke, being on the floor means you've fallen down and have lost control of your affected sides or your affected body. And getting on the floor was not great. And so I'd had a lot of concern about doing certain things because I'd always worried that if I fell, I wouldn't be able to get back up. So I was walking and I was doing well-ish. sitting down and standing up, but I would never really want to go anywhere too far from home by myself because heaven forbid I was walking down the sidewalk and I fell down. I just had this vision of myself just like the leaves piling the leaves piling up on top of and eventually a dog walker comes by and the dog like lifts a leg and pisses on me because I couldn't get off the floor. So I didn't go out by myself. So one of the first things that we worked on was getting on and off the floor. And so she does things like that where she'll really work with folks on targeting the things they would like to work on, but she also is happy to just come up with some stuff to try. And so I've made strides, huge strides in my own recovery, just trying things that she throws at me because our own capacity to envision is limited. I try and I do a lot of things that she has me do with her on my own because I am back at the gym. One of the benefits of teaching spin again is that I get a free access to a free gym. So I do go there quite often, but I just do the same things over and over. And I think that's pretty normal, right? Like we do our favorite things, we do the things that we're good at. And so having a person whose whole focus is really pushing the goalpost every time you meet them is really helpful. So yeah, she is the person who every time I think, well, I'm at 15 pounds, I'm good. 15 pounds is respectable. I'm not carrying in real life anything more than 15 pounds. Like, how about 20? And then before we know it, we're doing 50 pounds. So it's nice to
Yeah,
have a person.
coaches are amazing. So I have a running coach and I'm like, there's just no way. And they they see differently, right? They're outside of you. What did I want to ask about? Oh, I read one of your posts and it may have been a while ago, but it was, or it may have been recent. I don't know. It was about Mondays, and Mondays are your like solo gym days. And it really struck me like it's all perspective, right? Some people are like, oh, Mondays. And you're like, oh, Mondays, because there's been like the Shakespeare quote, like it's neither good or bad, thinking makes it so. And so you placed something on maybe the least popular day of the week that would make it like this thing that you get to appreciate about a Monday. But that does bring me to the last thing I wanted to ask you about was this appreciation of simple things, because I mean, what's simple, right? Like it's all perspective. So I'll just speak that our speech is something I mean, we're not really aware of what's, you're learning to talk to, 1, 2 years old, but in general, it's this thing that just comes and you learn in this, I don't know, it's this simple thing. We all speak to each other, you and me, not the whole world's population. So what about all of those things? Or going from Florida, standing to floor pre-stroke, right? That would have been considered, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like a simple movement or action. So what is it like to have simple things have different meanings now? What does that look like for you?
I think about that a lot. And I try not to act like I've arrived anywhere because it's constant, right? And so I do try to be mindful that there's still a lot of blind spots I probably have about things, but I do look back at what I took for granted, and I am mindful going forward to not take other things for granted. So these are unreal. I mean, hopefully this will make sense. One of the things I used to do before before the stroke, let me know if it's not making sense. Before the stroke, I was also in a dance company, and I danced for years. Not like professional traveling company, but like certainly local dance and like in the newspaper and like choreographed for big shows, things like that. And after the stroke, I went to dance class a couple of times and I got incredibly frustrated. And one of the things I had to realize, and I'm still working through it because I still don't go as often to dance class because I just don't have the time anymore. But something that I realized is that I had taken for granted, but I want to say it more powerfully than taken for granted, because taken for granted, whatever. But like I had created for myself a reality that I possess something special, that dance belongs to me now. Like I had forgotten that dance was a learned practice and a learned habit, and it's something that I worked at very, very hard for years before I got to the point where I was. And so just keeping in mind that sometimes we do something super well and it feels like part pride and part ego and part other things. Like, well, I am dancing. You know? Like I, as if I don't, I hope I'm articulating that right, or clearly, is that I had lost sight of how difficult dance is because I had become a good dancer, and I forgot all the formative steps that got me there. And getting back to having to do that again after the stroke has been very humbling and very informative and very instructive. And so dance is one, but other things are the same. Like things that I feel like I'm saying take for granted, but I mean it in a more strong way. But things that feel like, well, I have a right to be able to open doors. I have a right to be able to speak this way. I have a right to be able to access language. I have a right to like cognition. I have a, because, because I'm amazing and like, but really everything is something that we've worked for, and there's no shame or nothing bad about having to do it again. It is difficult and frustrating, and I'm frustrated all the time that my body still doesn't work the way I would like it to, but that's a different thing, right? Like setting aside what I think I'm owed because of nothing really. Nothing really. Like I don't owe the right to dance, then I'm not, than anybody else. Like everybody who I see in dance class working hard at it. And I've felt this way for a while, but since the stroke, I've really felt it more. I was never one of those people who make the jokes about people who are starting new exercise regimes in the gym in January. So I'm like, why not? Of course, start somewhere, do it, make it work, do one thing. And if that doesn't work, do the other thing. If that doesn't work, do another thing. And so intellectually, I've always felt that way. But since the stroke, being in the gym, in this body, and seeing others who are working hard and being their best selves, at least for that moment. They may never come back. They might drop off. They might do it for 3 weeks and then quit. But like in that moment, they are making the effort, and that's all we can celebrate. And so I just keep piecing those moments together, because I didn't get to be a dancer on stages. I didn't wake up that way.
Yeah, and you made me, well, a couple of things is instead of like the taking for granted, I heard you like at the tail end just say it's something to celebrate. So as opposed to even just not acknowledging it, but also to celebrate and appreciate those, like whatever level of like goal or process you're going through. But I did remember my kid, I feel like they did start to magically speak, but maybe there's a lot more to it. But actually, because you said that cognitive function and speech and feeding are all from the same space. Now it does make sense how it all kind of seemed natural. But I do remember teaching them to read and write, and all the frustrations, and even being a nice, conscious, mindful parent, all the tears anyway. And now it's like, how did you ever not know how to read or write, right? Like they can read or write. So I appreciate you just sharing about how the things we do in our day to day, they did take skill and like effort and learning and tears and frustration. So to relearn them, why wouldn't they take the same amount of like frustration? And then so for my last question, I always ask, what is your self-care or we chatted very briefly before, so this was truly like our first conversation, and you had mentioned like a scheduled walk. So whether you want to speak to physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, what does your self-care practices look like?
Hmm. So the stuff that is visible looks like lots of sitting down in quiet space, which sounds like not a big deal, but I was given a spouse. I chose a spouse who is a very outgoing, loving, chatty person. And I can't operate in that space all the time. So when I say sitting down and quiet, it is a little effort. I mean, he's wonderful. We get along very well. But he is somebody who will come home. And I think a lot of couples are like that. So I hope I'm not like bad mouthing my own partner. But he'll come home and if it's a little bit dim, he'll light the lights, he'll put on the TV, he'll put on a podcast, he'll open the drawers. He's like making dinner. He's apparently he's like grabbing pots and pans and like banging on them, like, babe, what are you doing? But carving out space where that's not happening is something that I do have. All that to say, I do have to like make space for those things. And so what that looks like for us is waking up early. And I'm up mostly by 6, 7 a.m. And on days when I have physical therapy or work out with fit to function, I'm doing that. But even on days when I don't have that, it means waking up with a cup of coffee, a ton of water, a cup of coffee, and my puzzles, and just quiet, or some very gentle chanting or background music or anything like that. And that way I get to all the time, at least 3, 4 times a week, have at least an hour to myself where I'm not having conversation, I'm not scrolling Instagram, I'm not watching TV, I'm not processing things. Well, I'm processing things when I'm doing the puzzles, but they're very soothing for me. So that's one thing that is an external visual thing. I also take a lot of walks. We live in a pretty lovely area with the leaves changing now, beautiful. And I do get outside. One thing that I took for granted before the stroke that I no longer do is just the ability to walk around in my neighborhood. And as a city person, lifelong city person, like walking is not new to me, but I would always walk to a place. And now one of my practices is walking to nowhere. I still make myself walk someplace because you got to turn around at some point. You just can't go. But going out for a walk for the sake of walking was something that I had not really done previously. We have a lot of green space in the Boston area, and I can't believe I've never really accessed it before. So now, very frequently, I'll go to a park and we'll just walk for an hour, 2 hours, sit on the bench, and just let the life pass. Um, we have a couple of big rivers with a lot of rowing. Rowing is big around here, and just watch the boats go by, watch the ducks swim by, and just having space in nature. I before in my before life, I was an outdoor adventure leader, and outdoors to me always meant getting in a car and driving 3 hours to Maine or New Hampshire for like a 3 day hike. But since the stroke, I really realized that nature is everywhere and I can just go outside and take a walk in my local park on a bike path and be out there for just a while, and that's okay. So those are two things I try to do. I also, other visual things I do shower every day. Let me not lie. I shower most days, which, sounds like not a big deal, but showering for me is a challenge because my left arm does not move super well. And getting undressed and dressed, especially when it's cold, can become like, what a chore. But it is something that I feel like spiritually for me, I can wash the previous day away and I can put on something new and be fresh. And I notice a difference when I just don't do that. I also make time to be with others. So I am mindful because I work mostly from home, pretty sedentary. We talked about that a little bit off screen. But it would not be difficult for me to be here at this desk in this house for 3, 4 days, unshowered, unsocialized. Like it could happen. And so I do make a point of being in touch with a friend, at least one person a day. Hi, friend, how's it going? Are you going to the show? Have you finished that book? Is it good? Do you recommend? Things like that. So those are all like little things that before I didn't really have to focus on as much because I was in the pattern of getting up early and dashing out of the house because I had to be somewhere. I had to be at court. I had to be in my office. I had to be fully dressed. Like there was no way I was not going to be showered. But now that things are so different, um, I've let the expectations about myself and how I present in the world be different. And I'm okay with that. But I also am trying to be mindful to not just like, give up give up on all the things and just be like, no one will know. So those are a couple of things. I still do a meditation every day. I do a wind down routine most nights. And it does include CBD lotion for my affected side because I do have some nerve pain and I think I might probably for forever. And so I just take a while to really get myself set up. You know about the Calm app?
No.
They have guided meditations and breathing exercises. So I'll do a couple of those every night before going to bed and just like transition into my night. I also have a pretty hard,
Oh, the
pretty,
Calm app. I do know
yeah,
the Calm app.
mhm,
I
mhm,
was like, no.
so good. I love that thing. Um, I start to wind down at 10, plan to be in bed by 10:30, Calm app meditation going by 10:45 because I do have a little bit of a routine. It takes me a little while sometimes because I still wear braces at night and things like that. So, having a definite start and definite end to the day kind of makes things not feel like the same all the time. So, those are some of the things.
And then because we met on Instagram, what I guess inspired you to share your journey? I will say like publicly. Yeah, what was the inspiration behind that?
I started it because when I came out of the hospital, so when I was in the hospital, nobody could see me and people had no idea what was going on. People always were asking my husband how I was doing. And because we weren't having visitors or guests or anything like that, it was still pretty COVID-y. Um, and I have friends all over the country, all over the world who are curious. So I thought, so for a while, I was sending like little newsletters to people. And then I realized I feel like I'm intruding by sending people stuff directly. And so if people are really curious, I can put it somewhere where they can look in when it's convenient for them. And so I decided to just start putting things on Instagram. And my page was private for a while, and so only people that I shared with. But I was feeling so lost and so disconnected when I was first home. And I tried to look on Instagram to see what other people were doing around their stroke and looking for ideas and looking just to connect and just to be with people. Because again, even when I was home, it was months before we like lifted COVID restrictions. People were not coming over. People were still very thoughtful and kind, but people were bringing flowers and leaving them on the doorstep. People were bringing meals and leaving them on the doorstep. People were like waving through the windows. People were still FaceTiming things like that. So I was having a really difficult time being home alone. Well, not alone, with my husband by myself and not even being able to go out for a walk. Um, so I looked on Instagram and I couldn't find much. I thought, wow, that's a shame. Build it. If you want to see it, build it. So I thought, let me build it because then I wondered who else was looking to connect. And I didn't want to make it difficult for people to connect with me. I didn't want people to have to ask my permission to read a post. So I went public with it. And so I think, I don't know, I don't follow who I have for followers, but at this point, I think at that when I decided that I had like 200 followers, which was everybody in my family here and in Haiti and across the country. And like all of a sudden it became like a couple thousand people. And it's just people who've also had stroke or family of people who've had stroke. And so people seem to be enjoying the posts. So I'm keeping them going. Oh, you're muted.
I am. There was like noise outside, so I didn't want the noise to come into what you were sharing. But I don't know how I found you, but I'm like so grateful because I can already tell from getting to know you over this past bit of time. And I even just noticed the time that had passed, but you're not, we're staying connected because you're amazing. I'm not sure how I found you, but I just knew that every time I saw your journey and then progress and then just all, I don't know, it struck me to a personal chord. Like you mentioned earlier, when I was making the connection between someone's trauma, you use the example of assault versus like something traumatic that happens to you physically. I relate in my own story with what you share, and it could seem we'll talk another time, right? But something that like that I see is just this like forward motion, and I don't know to say like resilience, but just a constant forward motion. And I know that constant is like step forward, steps back, drop it, drop the bar, pick it up. Which made me think I do remember those days. Our gym shut down. Now I'm in Florida, so very different. It was like open in 6 months, it was very different. But when we were all closed, our gym let us pick up kettlebells, and my gym bestie and I, we got different weights, right? So because we could only pick like 2 different weights, and we live 3 streets away, so we would drop them off at each other's house, and our children who were besties too would like wave through the window. But we had this like kettlebell exchange system during that time, when our gyms were shut down. I thought you'd appreciate that. But so I'm grateful. I don't know how I got lucky that you were put in my path, but I'm grateful for what you do share publicly because it's very inspiring to me. And so I'm thankful to hear your story. Is there anything else that I did not ask or focus on, or anything that you wanted to share before we say goodbye for now?
No, that was a lot, and thank you for making me cry in the middle of the day. And I wasn't quite ready. Not that I don't cry in the middle of the day because of the work, because we have client interviews all the time and they're difficult. But I wasn't quite ready to talk about my own stuff. So thank you for the space and for having me. I don't have anything else to add. If folks do want to connect, please reach out. I think it's difficult to do hard things alone, and we're all doing hard things. So let's not do it alone unless you really want to, in which case you should absolutely do whatever you want. But I'm happy to connect with folks who want to chat. People, I've just been so amazed at how people who are not as public in their recovery will still send me videos of themselves on a walk and themselves like picking up a dime. Like somebody will have their child drop a toy and like record themselves picking it up and like send it to my inbox. I'm like, amazing. Like, yeah, let's share that way, and different ways for different folks, and it's all totally fine. So let's be friends, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll put that information on where to find you in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, and it's funny because beforehand I was like, my light's amazing. I've gone from like
Oh yeah.
complete like sun in my face to darkness. But you can listen to this episode of Peaceful Power Project on any platform, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I would be so grateful if you would share any takeaways from this conversation. And Lola has opened up, I'll say her inbox to connection, or any takeaways as well from this conversation. Let me think of any of those. Oh, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, leaving a review would be super helpful. It helps us be more visible and spread the word. Anymore. Oh, and YouTube. Yeah, so it's just Sarah Granato on YouTube, and you can watch and you can meet us there. Wishing you all peace, power, and presence today.
Thanks everyone.